Okay. Hi, everybody. Are you having a good time? I am not Tarah. I am Meg. My name is Meg Layton. I'm with the Cybersecurity Services Group at Symantec, and I'm introducing you to Tarah. Tarah recently joined Symantec, but she and I knew each other virtually before that, and so I'm super pleased to be able to introduce her to you and welcome her to the stage.
What Meg didn't tell you is she's actually part of the reason the book came about to begin with. A lot of you are holding a copy of Women in Tech right now, and you'll see Meg in the dedications and acknowledgments for the book. She's an extraordinary person, and it was an honor and a pleasure to be able to get to work with her. All right. This is a lot like coming home, which is really great. I already have gotten hugged by like 10 people I know and like 15 people that I don't, and it was super comfortable. How's everybody doing today? Wait a minute, I thought there wasn't beer here. Why is everybody so happy? There's no coffee, I know that. And hey, y'all, I did just shotgun a rock star, so I'm either going to have an awesome talk or I'm going to literally explode all over this stage. Again, I'm Tarah Wheeler. I break things and it's fun. And sometimes Symantec pays me to break stuff on purpose, which is super cool. I have had a very odd life that gets me in front of you. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that and some of the things that I think we should be thinking about as cybersecurity experts going forward from today. I am here from the internet and I am sort of here to help you. So the questions we're going to ask today are about who among us, hint, it's us in this room, are building the future. I hang out on the internet a lot. You guys might recognize the art here. The awesome folk at Hacker Strip decided to make me into a comic book hero, and I was like, yes! Achievement unlocked the second that happened. So I just use it as my wallpaper now and try to live up to it most of the time. I grew up on a farm in Silverton, Oregon, lots of horses, and I love horsies, and we'll talk a little bit more about horsies later on too, in a weirdly cybersecurity related example. On that farm, I got a chance to poke around an awful lot, with a lot of machines. From about 13, 14 on, left the farm and started building computers because they were like jigsaw puzzles to me. I thought it was pretty awesome. And for those of you who have ever had to fight between IDE and SCSI connectors and jumpers on a motherboard, there we are, there's my people. And it was a lot of fun, right? But I don't think I really then thought about making information technology my future. I was allowed to build the machines then, but I wasn't really, it was just perceived that I would go into, political science or law or math or something like that, something that was more suited for girls, oddly enough. So I did exactly that. I went and spent some time learning how to speak in public, and I did a lot of debate, forensics. Anybody in here do speech and debate in high school and college? Yeah, it's a lot of fun, right? Trust me, it is useful in any career path ever. I also spent some time at Portland State and University of Michigan doing about a decade of what could be considered the unholy Venn diagram of warfare, political economy, and applied mathematics, mostly by doing computational simulations, and that's how I got my tech skills. It also has informed a lot of the way that I think about technology from that point until today, and I'm going to bring some stuff in that we sometimes don't think about in cybersecurity in a larger context. Getting out of academia, well, it wasn't so much getting out of academia as they sort of showed me the door when I couldn't pay for that PhD anymore, but fortunately, after all those years spent on evolution of cooperation, Microsoft didn't really understand the difference between game theory and game design, so they hired me to work on Halo. And my amusement aside, and one unbelievably hellish 92 hours of learn C# in 24 hours, it's not 24 hours, I ended up working at Microsoft on several projects there. I was lead for Lips for Xbox, and which was their karaoke game, and I joined the Halo team. After that, I did a lot of little jobs, little high-paying, short-term, high-stress jobs, kind of climbing my way up the tech ladder as a contractor a lot of the time. Gave me a lot of exposure to the wider technical ecostructure in Seattle and in the U.S. which informed me enough that I wrote this book right here to help women get into technology. I discovered that there was a couple of things that women could do to make themselves more successful, but more importantly, I discovered it was just important for women to understand that they're not alone in the experiences that they have. I've had conversations with at least 5 of the women in this room right now, behind the scenes, just making sure people know you're not alone. You aren't alone, and everyone else has some of the same problems you do. Here's at least a community of people that can tell you how to succeed or support you. I love to eat. And I cook a lot. It's one of my hobbies. I find a lot of beauty in the preparation of food, and while I am terrible at making slides, I'm really good at making salmon. And I enjoy it a great deal. I spend some time on the computer every day, and I dance Argentine tango upon occasion. The gentleman in question is often the one that I'm found cooking with. For those of you that know Deviant, a lot of fun. I have an odd life now that involves me trucking off to Virginia, where the GPS doesn't work to get you here. And I drink a lot of tea, which is odd because, as I just mentioned, I was really desperate for some coffee a little bit ago. I mean, I'd take some tea if anyone had it right now. But mostly when I sit down and do my work at the computer, I drink tea on the side and have my cat that I occasionally boot off the keyboard purr at me. That's sort of my life at this point. And as I spend time drinking my tea and poking around on the computer and meeting people on Twitter, I see you up there, Adrian. I have a chance to think about the broader lessons that I learned in technology and political economy. And I started a couple of months ago thinking about the kinds of people that make up cybersecurity and the motivations we have, as well as some of our limitations when it comes to building the future. So, there's a couple of examples I'm going to talk about today when it comes to the way that we in cybersecurity don't just affect the future, we build it drastically. I'm going to talk about money and cars. Who likes money and cars? Awesome. Who recognizes the car up here? 1972, I heard it, Chevelle. I heard a lady voice over there saying, Chevelle, you my girl. That's what I'm talking about. That's my car right up there. And then, of course, fat stacks of cash. Who doesn't like that? Except cars and money don't really look like that anymore, do they? Which is a damn shame because that is a beautiful vehicle. So, when it comes to money, what's our job? What's the thing we should be thinking about as we move forward into a land where money doesn't look like it used to any longer? When I think about financial security, when I think about transactions, I think about a constant quest by information technologists and security professionals to make transactions frictionless, seamless, global, right? Here's one of the problems with that. As many of us in the room know, every time they hear the word metadata and cringe a little bit and reach for the Rolaids, transactions, when it comes to digital transactions, are also a form of communication, and they leak something. What do they leak? They leak metadata, right? The way that we track and trace money has become an unbelievably huge, if unseen upon occasion, piece of the way that we spend our time as cybersecurity professionals. A lot of the people in this room are part of what I would like to call the information security community as opposed to the industry. A lot of the time, it's the cybersecurity industry that's been working on financial transactions and the incremental improvement of security in those transactions. The community has had the chance to break things and make splashy headlines, but often we don't dig down into the dirty, dry, dull work of making sure that $1 gets from one location to another securely and privately. Most of the time, we just focus on the securely and don't pay as much attention to the privately, right? Here's the problem. As those transactions start leaking information, start leaking communication, we begin to find out that data is worth more than gold. I'm not going to say worth its weight in gold because that's an entirely different existential conversation. But that the idea of being able to track who has spent what, when, where, how, and on what is a profoundly valuable piece of information, almost always arguably worth way more than the actual value of the transaction itself. Am I right? Yep, there we go. So who are the people that are building the stores of money that we have for the future? Who are the people that are telling us how we can and can't spend money and what the associated properties of those transactions are. Well, I'm going to surprise you a little bit because, as I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time in political economy. And one thing that many folks in this room may not have ever paid much attention to is an underlying theory of macroeconomics called the Mundell-Fleming theory. Okay? How many of you have heard of Mundell-Fleming? Several of you in the room. Good. Because it's the major macroeconomic theory that's based around the way nations move money around the world. Okay? We've got Robert Mundell and Marcus Fleming up here on. And Robert Mundell, that is about as hot as you're ever going to see an economist, by the way. He's dead now and everything. So we've got Mundell Fleming up here and a curve that's a little odd looking, right? What we see here is, and I'm going to explain this in 3 really simple ways, is that governments can control only 2 out of 3 things at a time. 1 is capital flows, the amount of money that can come in and out of an economy. 2, they can control the price of that money, the exchange rate, right? In relation to other currencies. And 3, they can control their monetary policy, internal interest rates, often related to fiscal policy. Does that make sense? In most free, unplanned economies, those governments choose to control both capital flows and monetary policy, and they let the exchange rate go hang. They let that be free. Why do you think that is? Does anybody have an answer to that? Guesses? Thoughts? For those of you? Okay. The reason why this happens is because if you try to hold all 3 of those things constant, people will find a way to put extreme pressure on one of those 3 points and break your economy, either by making imports and exports so expensive that you can't purchase them, or by making them so cheap that your internal goods are no longer feasible for purchase, or if you're controlling the exchange rate, you can make the money so costly for transfer that it's just never transferred out of the country, making essentially imports and exports impossible. Or the amount of money that travels in and out of the country, which is closely related to the free movement of people and goods, as well as that money as well. Make sense? Okay. These are the people that decades ago underlined, outlined, and provided a theory for the way that macroeconomics works right now. Well, right now it's starting to change. The way that money moves around the world has started to change pretty drastically, right? 2.5 hours ago, this was the exchange rate for Bitcoin, right? I think we all remember the giant death in the middle of January where a lot of Bitcoin wallets were stripped of their value. This is the kind of currency curve and valuation that you see in a steady, stable means of exchange, in a valid currency, right? There's other options out there, probably the 2 that I have heard the most about, not necessarily in any particular order, are Defcoin, because I've got a lot of friends who like to play around with that currency, and Zcash, right? Bitcoin is the way now that people are starting to transfer value around the world. It's private, perfectly verifiable, and there are no currency controls on it whatsoever. If you are a monetary economist, this scares the ever-loving bejesus out of you. And the reason why is those same capital controls, interest rates, and exchange rate prices that governments use to try to maintain a stable currency are deeply tied to how they maintain industry stability as well. Imagine and remember, a close example of this is in 2008 when the housing industry crashed, right? One of the first things that the federal government did was what? Dropped the interest rate, right? To make it easy for homeowners to pay their mortgages, to try to keep fewer people from losing their homes, right? That's one of the first things that an economy will do to try to stimulate growth, is drop the interest rate. Now take a look at how much the market cap for Bitcoin is right there. It's almost what? $20 billion, right? Imagine $20 billion being sucked out of any nascent industry in this country and having zero capacity for capital controls, interest rates, or financial capital controls, interest rates, or the price of money on the exchange market to be used as a tool to fix the problem for that industry. This should scare the hell out of you, because it means that using any kind of eminently transferable currency, you can block, disrupt, destroy almost any small market imaginable. This is pretty scary stuff. And who are the people that created this? These are people from our industry, right? I'm not saying that Satoshi knew and we're not going to use the pronoun he because we're not sure, are we? I'm not going to say that Satoshi knew what they were doing, but I hope that at least a little bit of thought was placed into the possibility for the abuse of this system to destroy networks, industries, people's jobs and lives. Think about the consequences of this. So really, are these global transactions frictionless? Perhaps in terms of information security, yes. We can reach pure frictionless transaction costs, or almost no transaction costs. But what's lying behind those transaction costs? Disrupting markets disrupts people, right? How many of you have seen this show? Downton Abbey. Anybody? Oh my, so not as many Anglophiles in this audience. What are you people all watching? I mean, Scandal, I'll tell you. If you're on the East Coast, I gotta watch Scandal myself, okay? If you're a fan of British television and tea, and clearly I'm betraying some of my aspirational origins on this one, I'm going to warn you right now, if you haven't seen it yet and you want to, I'm about to spoil some stuff, so feel free to plug your ears, sing Hail Britannia. At the end of the show, Lady Mary, and I am such a Lady Mary, I am not an Edith, marries a lovely gentleman named Henry Talbot, an aristocrat in London, right? This is the post-war period after World War I. At the end of the show, which described very lovely, very well, the upheaval in the economy and in class status that London and Britain experienced after World War I. Lady Mary is marrying an impoverished aristocrat. And interestingly enough, what does he do for his source of livelihood? He opens an auto shop, an aristocrat. Marrying a countess opens an auto shop, because at that time, in the disruption of the technology that previously existed for transporting people, this was one of the most prestigious occupations imaginable, fixing cars, right? Who was he replacing? That guy. That guy didn't have a job anymore. 3 or 4 years after an aristocrat opened his mechanic's shop. Now, when it comes to horses, there's no more workaday nags that live on the streets that transport people around. Instead, horse racing and horses are just the sport of the rich, right? Who knows what this is? Let me give you another guess. Ascot, right? The land of the lovely hats. I'm not a fan of the one in front, but I could super pull off that black one with the pink band. All right. When we have an industry that is disrupted in terms of transportation, what we see is a transition of the class of people that are occupied in the maintenance, repair, and workaday portions of the labor of that industry, right? And what's happening with cars right now. The transition from an automobile as the pursuit of the rich to the workaday transportation of the middle class to fleets of self-driving, auto-dispatched, no longer owned by a person cars is coming. In fact, it's frankly already here, right? It would be more accurate at this point to not think of a fleet of cars, but a herd of them, right? So let me ask you this. 1 million people right now have the job auto mechanic in the United States. What's about to happen to them in a matter of less than 3 years, likely? Let's think about the fact that the people who are auto mechanics now are either transitioning their skills into diagnostic work, into computational work. Just because you wear jeans and a tool belt doesn't make you not a computer scientist, as many of these auto mechanics are becoming now, right? Instead, auto mechanics look a little bit more like this now. Who saw this talk? Mark and Kevin hacking a Tesla is what the future of cybersecurity in the auto industry looks like. Everyone feel free right now to tell Mark I called him a mechanic behind his back. Hi, Mark. Right? This is the future of cybersecurity in the auto industry. And the way that we think about mechanics, about herds of cars, about the way that we create cash, and the way that we create these frictionless transactions, which, although they may be beautiful to us in terms of theory, deeply change the way that other people live their lives, should be the foremost ethical concern of the people in this room. Fair? Good. Our actions constantly have human consequences. And those human consequences need to be borne in mind as we do things that disrupt the existing ecosystem. Every time someone proposes an improvement on technology, it creates a long and hopefully thinner and thinner tail of people who have been left behind by that disruption. I'm not saying we need to slow the pace of technology or the rapid rate of adoption of innovation. I am saying that it's time that we remember that there is a cost behind our actions that is almost never surfaced in the beauty of a LaTeX paper that we see online, or in the simplicity of a tweet, or in the beauty of perfectly factored code. There are humans behind that we need to be thinking about. So, now that we've taken a look at the fact that we ourselves are building and hacking and maintaining and creating the new ways that people get around the world and that money and value get around the world, let's ask ourselves what our responsibilities are. I can tell you right now that someone who is not building a culture of joy and responsibility is an InfoSec rock star. When you are someone who has a large audience and who does not pay attention to vuln disclosure rules, who does not care that there are humans who are affected by the data breaches that you yourself may be exposing, and opt for the noise of headlines as opposed to the quiet of service and allowing people to protect themselves before chasing down the register and Ars Technica and TechCrunch to let them know that you're awesome, I have a problem with you. I saw a tweet, and I thought about it, and there's a woman who isn't in this room. Her name is Whitney Merrill, one of my heroes in cybersecurity. She said, it's time to stop creating InfoSec heroes. And I said, I'm going to disagree a little with you. I have a lot of heroes in InfoSec, but none of them are rock stars. Okay? It's time for us to think about our jobs as service to the larger ecosystem, not of cybersecurity, but of the people that experience the cost of the innovations that we create and the problems we find and surface for the rest of the world. We have a personal responsibility to a larger community. And rock stars, they don't buy into it. They're not part of it. But that's okay. That's the reason we call this the information community, not the information hierarchy, right? We create every single day because we can't not create. It drives me crazy to not do something interesting with something. By the end of today, I will probably have figured out, ooh, it's a ruler too. Sweet. That's awesome. Ooh, okay. Ooh, who's got okay, that's gonna, all right. We create because we can't not create, because we're easily distracted, because there are shiny things in the world, and if you poke at them, they do things, and it's awesome. And yet, we have to stop and remember that everything has an opportunity cost, right? I brought macroeconomics and the auto industry and cryptocurrency into a talk about the way the future is created because it matters to the people in this room. And more than that, at one or two removes out, it matters to your aunt and your uncle who don't understand what PII is, much less that a recent breach caused their passwords to go wide, right? We create and we create because we can't not create. And we're the ones building this future. Understand? When I think about what I want to do with my existence, when I think about the impact that I want to have on the world, I think about taking everything I possibly can in my head and shoving it out into the world as fast as possible, often not as coherently as I could, and stopping and asking myself the very first question, the very first ethical rule of cybersecurity, which is not, what kind of awesomeness can I create, but who's this going to hurt? And moving from there with mitigation, with remediation, with respect, and with, my God, with humility, is how we create lasting change in the world that takes the awesomeness that's inside us and the joy in this community and pushes it out to the world in a useful sense, a helpful sense, an innovative sense, and a respectful sense for the people that didn't have the opportunities that the people in this room had to join an awesome industry full of people that are creative and beautiful and interesting and unique every single day. This notion of humility and community is what's going to build a future that is far greater than any rock star could ever understand. That is one where we take joy in breaking things apart and getting dirty and building things every single day. And I suppose the last thing I want to express is just how grateful I am to be standing here. The stickers on my laptop say where I've been and a couple places I shouldn't have been. That's mostly inside the laptop. And I want to express my gratitude to the people in this room for listening to me, for thinking, and for hopefully taking these lessons back to each of your individual communities. And remembering that behind every innovation is a long, thin tail of people who are going to get left behind. Come to think of it, that sounds like a fairly good target for some disruption, no? Yes, we've got some questions that are going to get started happening sometime reasonably soon. So I will first, I suppose, take questions from the folks that are in this room, and then I think there's somebody who is mediating and moderating questions online who's going to throw them out at me. So that, or maybe someone just looks at Twitter and hollers them out. Okay, question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 That is a really good question, because that's part of what lives in the back of my head right now, is the creation of an ethical framework that can be drilled down into a right action, into a binary, essentially, when it comes to a decision. And obviously we don't want to load down every single keystroke with the depth of an ethical decision or consequence, or we're worse than people who, want us to code comment on everything. I mean, those people are friggin' tyrants, right? So the question I would ask is, not necessarily can I impart to you the ethical framework for the industry or the piece of the industry that you're in, but can you take an overarching concern for the people who are specifically the ones who are going to be left behind by the innovation you're going to create, and build your own framework for what you think is responsible treatment of those people? The answer is going to be very different in the auto industry, in the financial industry. In the industry of the sharing economy is a really good way to put it too. The people that are frequently hurt by the sharing economy are the people at the margins of every economy, which is how you see the profound homelessness problem in San Francisco, right? Because once you've driven the marginal utility of having a local service provider into almost nothingness compared to the economy of scale that a large provider like Airbnb at 2.4 million hotel rooms can provide, you see that a small service provider is driven into nothingness. The question then is, there are some industries that have created a fatter tail of people left behind. The car and hotel industries are probably the two biggest ones, because those are large, huge portions of providers in the service industry. Make sense? So I would say the first question is, what industry are you in? How many people can be affected by it? And second of all, or in third, what is the framework that you think you need to create to protect the people in that tail of disruption? Make sense? Okay. You have to create it yourself. The question is, are you at least thinking about it? If we can start there, we've gotten someplace, right? The Pareto optimal ethics, which I'm fairly sure someone's screaming internally by hearing me say. All right? Go ahead. Good. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 That is a wonderful question, and oddly, I'm going to relate it to finance as well, or at least in internet infrastructure. I've seen and paid attention to some of the same innovations you're talking about in the medical profession as well, mostly because I'm paying attention to things like HIPAA disclosures and things like that, but also the advent of AI and robotics in the medical industry. It's a really interesting one, and the reason I've noticed this is I pay attention also to gender-based breakdowns of prestigious careers. As more women have joined the medical industry, the prestige and pay of that industry has dropped. Interestingly, that's not true for hospital administrators, who are like 98% white men, and anyone who's on the cutting edge of research like AI and like robotics. So the thing that I'm going to relate to is note that just as in with auto mechanics essentially needing to become diagnostic technicians and computer scientists, because a car is a computer, right? It does the thing. You know, it runs, it rolls, it can add now. Well, the one that I was in today is clearly not a computer because it took me way off track. But it's bad computer bad. But the thing I would note is that this is closely related, I think, to the way that mobile infrastructure in Africa has recently been developing, where instead of dropping cables into the ground, fiber optic cables, instead the focus has been on, and this is also true of India, the focus has been on creating satellite and mobile architecture and infrastructure instead. We've skipped entirely over the building of a sub-Terran infrastructure with cable laying, and have skipped straight to mobile data, right? So I think the possibility exists in the medical field for people who are entering it to recognize that they can simply skip past some of the, I would call it the cruft of the medical administration, where you spend like 3 or 4 years doing rotations on, on paperwork filling out, which that's all being disrupted by artificial intelligence and automated services anyway, and skip straight to the notion that the human body is accessible and repairable via artificial intelligence and robotics. Skip past it. Go straight into the technical element of medicine, and at least you're not being left behind. That works for the people who are in school now and who are young enough to change. For the ones who have spent 25 years as a GP in the middle of nowhere, that's exactly the kind of person who's going to be disrupted by this. The ones who recognize this and start getting training and start pulling in that information become just like the auto mechanic shops that have pulled in brand new diagnostic shops. They end up with all of the new service, all of the new business that's coming through, right? And as we start repairing humans faster and better, frankly, the medical profession is going to shrink, right? You'll end up with more, with people who are more specialized and who are good at their jobs. Next question. Does any, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Based on the size of industry, the auto driving industry is actually the only one that I can think of right at the moment. And the reason why is there's a lot of better examples of being left behind, frankly, in the United States. We have a particularly heartless form of capitalism in the U.S., and as a result, most retraining efforts that you'll find that have been successful are actually in Western Europe and in South Asia. South Asia has been very successful in doing retraining efforts and creating vocational training programs in especially India to move people who are what we would call in the U.S. past their prime. Training someone who's over 30 in programming in the U.S. is seen as a waste of time by most venture capitalists. In India, you can start at 55, 60. So, and no one knows on the other end of the code how old you are, right? So since no one knows that, and there is not the same kind of innate, I would call it very much technical discrimination in India, that's a success story, I would say, in retraining. And I'll note as well that that kind of training is going to need to come along fast and hard for the trucking industry in the United States, because we're already chaining together long-haul trucks. And the number of people being employed in long-haul trucking is dropping drastically, and it's about to go almost completely away soon. There's a reason why I said we need to stop thinking about cars as fleets, but as herds, because in the near-term future, it's reasonable for one human to manage 10 to 100 trucks in a herd across the country. And I am just now creating the greatest country music in my head. Oh, yeah. Get along, little Peterbilt, get along. But that's, the answer is, elsewhere, yes. Here, the recent election caused me to put my plans on hold to be involved in an education startup because there was no long-term government contracts available for retraining. And I knew there wouldn't be under this administration. In 4 to 8 years, we will hopefully see a little bit more reason when it comes to investing in the people that live in the United States that are being disrupted by the massive migration of capital out of this country to protect the resources of the people who just recently benefited from the election. And that's as political as I'm going to try to not be today. Continue. Uh-huh. Farmers are hackers too. I grew up on a farm. Believe me, that's how I learned to tinker, right? Don't you ever tell somebody that he can't get inside his John Deere and fix a problem, right? So I think it was ruinously stupid and short-sighted on the part of John Deere because they alienated their core constituency and didn't understand anything about the nature of somebody who spends all day long, every day, self-reliant and fixing their own machinery. Sound a little familiar? Right? How do we respond when people tell us we can't get inside our own boxes? Say what? Okay, let's go. Mm-hmm. 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 Give your dollars to the EFF and the ACLU. Mm-hmm. Turns out Symantec has a charitable matching plan. I can give $2,000 a year to anybody I want to if I match it. And I was like, interesting. Guess where your dollars are going this year. What's up, EFF? Yeah. Are you a lawyer? I'm not a lawyer. But there are good lawyers out there. And a lot of them work for the EFF and the ACLU. They're the ones whose job it is to fight for us right now. We give them the technical backdrop and the reasons to do the job, and then we let them do what they do best, which is argue for people, or argue for our rights for us in court. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, especially because there's an additional factor there, which is for anyone who is a disadvantaged population in technology, if you're female, if you're a person of color, if you are non-gender binary, if you're queer, you end up with an additional cost because you also end up with a representative factor for yourself, right? Like, am I going to be the person who's always the troublemaker, who's always pointing out that we're doing something wrong? So there's the additional cost to that too, and I've noticed that. That is a wonderful question because it gets to the heart of the ethics that we all need to begin espousing when it comes to the kinds of disruptions we see. First of all, don't you ever think of yourself as a cog ever again. Yeah, right there. We have the unique capacity in cybersecurity because we have a negative unemployment rate in this field. That's right. People who aren't cybersecurity specialists are getting hired as cybersecurity specialists. Negative unemployment in this field. So we have more freedom than people in almost any other industry right now to say, I sympathize with the position that you're coming from. Unfortunately, I can't ethically support it. Bye. And the next part of that always is making sure that you recognize that it's your job to run your career and not your company's. Once you've acknowledged your individuality, your freedom to move around, and you've updated your resume, it's time to push back on what you see as an ethical problem. And I will note that almost every company out there at a skip level up is starved for feedback. Most people only ever hear from the people above and below them directly. And a larger communication, especially if you have the permission to send it out to your entire organization or your entire country or company, can often be not only a call to action, but also put yourself in a position of moral and ethical leadership there. And if you want to take that burden on and you want to think more about it, then I highly encourage you to do so, because that's part of taking a stand for the ethics of cybersecurity as well as the functionality of it. Fair enough? Okay. Next question. Does anybody have any questions from somebody said there were questions on the internets, and there's like, you're the Twitter monkey. You're my Twitter shirt though right now. Okay. Well, tell Twitter to screw off. All right. I do that every day anyway. It's super fun, guys. All right. If there are no other questions, one more here. And before we roll on into a giant argument, which really, gentlemen, let me have you have beer instead of a seat in the auditorium right now. Trust me, this gets way better when we get shots out. I'm just telling you that right now. Okay? Before we do that, first of all, thank you for your service as a doctor. I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you very much. And your wife as well. My God, yes. So, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to an industry that's telling you that there's a change coming, because at least you'll be prepared for what's happening and you can see it and identify it as it's happening. And you're correct. Nothing's ever going to replace human beings, because a machine doesn't do the same kind of calculations we do. The reason I'm standing here right now, and it's not my computer delivering this lecture, is because my MacBook can't yet put deep thought into ethics and morality and the kinds of decisions that you have to make when you tell someone what the best thing for them is, right? You can be provided information on a lot of different levels, but only you can walk someone through the process of making a major health decision, correct? And give them that empathy and understanding that's going to make their care a better place to be and their life a better place to be. And that, right there, is the responsibility we all have as well. You do not present options in a vacuum. You give them to your boss. You give them to the people that are going to be able to enact the kinds of technological changes that you can create, along with an understanding of the implications of those changes and that disruption, right? These messages do not get delivered in a vacuum. They come along and are packaged with the ethics that we all have, the personal responsibility to implement and to communicate and to live by. And I think that'll do it for today. Thanks so much.
Some of you have asked if Tarah will sign your books. We're going to do book signing at the Semantic booth. So if you're interested in getting your book signed, come by and see us there.